Let's get started just by going over the agenda. So we just went over our introductions and explaining what our second session is going to be about. At 10:15, we're going to start a heart health Kahoot trivia. If you hadn't seen already based on the title, today is going to be all about heart health, and we've partnered with Jiva Clinic, and they're going to be giving us a little workshop, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So this is kind of the breakdown for the rest of our session today. And while we have you here, could you all just take a brief, really quick, like 4-minute survey on your phone? That'd be really great. So what you can do is you can just open up your phone to your camera app, scan the QR code, and then just take our survey. And if anyone needs the link, let me know and we can get that out to you too. But if you can scan your screen, it'll probably be a lot easier. This is kind of the theme of it. It's called I Heart You, Improve Your Heart Health.
So for some of our learning objectives in our 106 online session, so we really want to talk to you about what heart health is with Jiva Clinic, have a panel event with some of their executive board members, and really talk about some tips that youth can use in terms of food, fitness, and medicine.
Actually, right now we're going to be transitioning into our little activity at the start of our program. So Aditi is going to start sharing her screen in just a moment, and we're going to go to kahoot.it and we're going to play an interactive quiz. So I'm going to put that into the chat for everyone while Aditi gets it set up.
Okay, we can go ahead and get started with our first question. Our first question is going to be a true or false. And the question is, your heart will beat around 115,000 times each day. So is this true or a false statement?
So true is blue and red is false.
Right, your heart will beat around 115,000 times per day. Okay. Our next question is also going to be another true or false for a fact. So your heart pumps around 2,000 gallons of blood every day. Is this true or is this false? Again, blue is true and red is false. Yeah, so our heart does pump a lot of blood each day, and it does pump at a very fast rate each day as well. Okay, those are some introduction questions to get us accustomed to the heart. Here's another question. So happiness and a strong sense of emotional vitality does not lower your risk of heart disease. So is this true or false? Does happiness lower your risk of heart disease or does it increase it? Yeah, so happiness and a strong sense of emotional vitality does lower your risk of heart disease. Stress management, as panelists will be talking about later on, plays a crucial factor in heart disease and in the health of our cardiovascular system. All right, let's go to the next question. Okay, so this is going to be 4 options now. So what is not a risk factor for heart disease? We have increased sitting time in red, older age in blue, increased water consumption in yellow, and high blood pressure in green. Right, so increased water consumption is usually good for you, but decreased water consumption can make your heart and cardiovascular system pump blood faster, which could increase your blood pressure and increase your risk of heart disease as well. Okay, next question. Our 5th question is going to be another true or false. So you control your heart health through diet, exercise, and managing stress. Is this true? Blue or false in red? Right, so heart health is not something that's controlled by one thing. It includes diet, exercise, managing stress, and a holistic version of what wellness means. Okay, on to our 6th question, another true or false. So runners of any speed have 15% lower risk of heart disease and stroke. Is this going to be true or false? Yeah, so this is actually false. Runners of any speed have a 45% lower risk of heart disease and stroke. This was published in a recent study that showed that runners were able to increase their lower the risk of heart disease by improving their heart health. Okay. And on to our last question is going to be another true or false. So, most risk factors can be controlled early on in life, lowering the risk of heart disease later in life. So, can you control things early in your life that lowers the risk of heart disease later in life? True or false? Yeah, so heart disease is not the major cause of death in younger populations, but it definitely is in older generations. So by using these preventative techniques in our youth, this could potentially help in decreasing the risk of heart disease later on. Okay, so I hope that quiz was informative for you all. We'll just take a quick look at the winners and then go on to our presentation. I'm not sure who you are, but congrats on winning our quiz.
Thank you all so much for participating. So we're going to get back into our presentation now. And let's start off by introducing our panelists. So take it away.
Hey everyone, so we're from Jiva Clinic. So my name is Shreyas. I'm a second year student at UC Berkeley. This is my major. I'm majoring in microbial biology with an emphasis in computational bio. And I'm one of the co-presidents of Jiva Clinic, which is a student-run organization on campus. And we're partnered with a nonprofit called the South Asian Heart Center. And our goal, our mission is basically just to educate the South Asian population and discuss cardiovascular disease and how to have a heart healthy lifestyle.
Hi everyone, I'm Namrata. I am also a second year student at UC Berkeley majoring in molecular and cell biology. I joined Jiva Clinic last year and I'm also an intern at the South Asian Heart Center. So through both Jiva Clinic and the South Asian Heart Center, I've got to have a lot of discussions with people and different professionals in the medical field about heart health. And I also help discuss and advocate for sustainable lifestyle changes.
Hello everyone, I'm Shreya. I'm also a second year at Berkeley. I intend on majoring in MCB with a double major in psych. I've been in Jiva Clinic since my freshman year and I've really enjoyed just sharing my passion for spreading awareness to the South Asian community, as I myself am South Asian, and like partnering with the South Asian Heart Center, like teaching people how to do BMI readings and all of that has been really helpful as well. So we're going to first start off talking about what cardiovascular disease is. So first, it's the broader definition is it's a heart condition that includes diseased vessels, structural problems, and blood clots. And there's different types. There's like four main ones. The first one's coronary artery disease. There's calcification, angina, heart attacks, and heart failure. And these are mainly just caused by like blockages to the heart due to like poor lifestyle choices, which we will be going over. Strokes can also occur, which is a blockage to the brain. And to identify stroke, there's actually an acronym that people use called FAST. And it stands for face, arm, speech, and time. So if you notice facial droopings, arm weakness, like speech difficulties, like slurring, and time, that's like, those are like symptoms of stroke. And then peripheral arterial or vascular disease, also known as PAD or PVD. These are blockages to the arms and limbs, and all of these are like heart-related diseases that basically different blockages to different parts of the body. And then the aortic disease affects the aorta, which is like one of the biggest valves at the top of your heart. And this one causes life-threatening bleeding, and it's actually one of the hardest ones to catch as well. And then some causes are, so there's not necessarily causes, but there are risk factors. So the first one is high blood pressure, which is why like at free clinics and stuff like that, or at the hospital, they're always checking, especially after a certain age in older people. High cholesterol is also a very big risk factor. smoking and diabetes, obesity, and also your ethnic background, which is why Jiva Clinic, we especially pay attention to the South Asian community because they're more likely to have these risk factors such as high blood pressure or type 2 diabetes. And family history can also have a big role, as well as age, gender, diet, and alcohol.
Okay, so as Shreya explained, South Asians are disproportionately affected by heart disease and diabetes, and the statistics are so staggering that it's often called the twin epidemic. And so in the slide, you can see the countries highlighted in the map. So these are the ones disproportionately affected by the twin epidemic. And these South Asian countries include India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, as well as Afghanistan, Bhutan, and the Maldives. But 60% of individuals with cardiovascular disease are South Asians, despite South Asians only comprising 17% of the total world population. So you can see how disproportionately affected South Asians are by the twin epidemic. So these are some more facts about how South Asians are greatly affected by heart disease and diabetes. So first, more South Asians are affected by coronary artery disease at a younger age. And there are also some guidelines to be at lower risk for developing heart disease. So for the BMI guideline, it should be lower than 23 for South Asians, but for all non-South Asians, the guideline is set to 25. But since South Asians do have a greater risk factor, the BMI cutoff is lowered. As well as the fasting blood sugar should be below 100 milligrams per deciliter, and your total cholesterol to HDL, which is your good cholesterol ratio, should be below 3.5. And then for blood pressure, it should be 120 over 80 or below. Also, there are just many, many studies and cross-sectional analysis between racial groups that have shown South Asians having metabolic syndrome, which is having at least 3 of the following, which is high blood pressure, high blood sugar, excess body fat around your waist, high triglycerides, and low HDL. So these are just some facts about South Asians and how disproportionately they're affected by heart disease.
So now we're going to be talking about risk markers, which I think Shreya covered a little bit. So these are basically the things that your physician, your healthcare provider will look at to see what your risk is for developing cardiovascular disease in the future. And so we have traditional risk markers as well as comprehensive risk markers. So we'll take a look at the difference between those two right now. But first of all, this is called an iceberg chart. So this is sort of like the top of the iceberg, and these are the basic risk factors or the risk markers that you look at when you get a blood test done. So you have your lipid panel and you have your glucose, your blood pressure, your BMI. So just looking at this right off the bat, compared to the goals that Namrata was sort of talking about, does anyone want to answer in the chat, like what your overall view is on this individual? Are they overall healthy? Any red flags? Anything you notice? All right, and while y'all are doing that, so this is sort of the top of the iceberg. And this is a chart that the South Asian Heart Center uses to distinguish between the different sorts of tests. And if you actually look at the bottom part of the iceberg, this is all the comprehensive risk markers that most surface level testing misses out on. So you can see that this individual generally looks healthy with normal cholesterol levels, normal HDL levels, triglycerides, and pretty borderline glucose and BMI as well. But if you go down here and you look at more detailed things like the particle size of LDL and HDL, those are in the red range. So this sort of goes to show how the basic risk markers that most people look at aren't actually very indicative of your overall heart health or your risk of developing cardiovascular disease. And this is actually shown to be especially true for South Asians. A lot of studies have shown that lots of physicians, unless they're very specialized in cardiovascular health, aren't really aware of these advanced screening, and they don't really do it as much. So a lot of people just go by thinking that they're doing fine, but they're missing out on all of these risk markers down here. So just to go over some of these, LDL and HDL, you can sort of think of as like the bad cholesterol and the good cholesterol that you hear a lot. And then there's triglycerides, which is the amount of lipids in your bloodstream at any given moment. And then your glucose is your blood sugar, and then obviously blood pressure and your BMI. So I think someone asked in the chat how you check your BMI. So you can actually Google BMI calculator and just input your height and weight, and it'll give you a value. For the normal population, the recommendation for BMI is to be below 25. But like Namrata was saying, for South Asians, we usually start seeing problems develop at 23. So that's the goal. But down here, you can look at the LDL particle size and the HDL particle size. So usually smaller LDL particles are much more dangerous. They're much more dense in cholesterol. So they have a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease. Things like LP little a or lipoprotein A, which is actually a genetic predisposition for cardiovascular disease. There's like family history that you need to check, inflammation, insulin levels, hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month average of your blood glucose. So it says a lot more than just your glucose level up here. And then obviously what we'll be talking about later, the disorders of lifestyle. So your stress levels, sleep, physical activity, and your nutrition. So now we're going to be going on to the MEDS platform. So MEDS, or Meditation, Exercise, Diet, and Sleep, is sort of the platform that we at Jiva Clinic and also the South Asian Heart Center uses to discuss lifestyle. And so the first part of that is meditation. So one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that just as important as exercise and diet is meditation as well as sleep. So we'll be looking at how all 4 of these play a role. All right. So these are sort of the main forms of meditation that you could do: concentrative, contemplative, and transcendental. And you can read here what these are about, but the one I want to focus on is transcendental meditation, or sort of losing the object. So this technique has been proven through many studies to be one of the most effective techniques of meditation. Basically, if you take a class on this, your instructor will give you some random word that's meaningless to you, but they ask you to keep repeating it until you lose meaning of that word, you lose awareness of anything else, and you're basically in a state of pure consciousness. And so that's sort of transcendental meditation. You'll see in the next slide how effective that is. But our goal for meditation, ideally, we want to be meditating at least twice a day for 20 minutes each time. And so with these 2 graphs, this was a study by the Journal of Social Behavior and Personality that found that those who practiced TM with the guideline of twice a day for 20 minutes each day has significantly reduced risk of mortality, both cardiovascular mortality and also alt-cause mortality, basically all other causes. So overall, meditation definitely does help. And the reason that is because of the stress hormone cortisol. So the stress hormone cortisol usually increases when you're under stressful situations. It's sort of your flight or fight hormone. And it's a huge risk factor in all of these issues. So neurodegenerative disorders, heart disorders, digestive disorders, and immune system disorders. And research has found that when you meditate and you reduce your stress, it reduces the impact that cortisol has on all of these, and it reduces your cortisol levels overall. And a lot of people, they don't see or think about the direct effects of meditation. It's more abstract, which is why they often forego or deprioritize it. But the research has shown that not only does it decrease cortisol levels, meditation definitely alters your brain waves and makes it more similar to your restful brain waves that you have during sleep. So scientifically, it definitely does help in terms of reducing all of these risk factors. And I think we saw this in the Kahoot as well. So here's another study which basically showed that I think out of 1,000 people who volunteered to be part of the study, there was a 5-point decrease in their blood pressure when they practiced meditation. And that decreases the risk of atherosclerosis, plaque buildup, and also heart attacks and heart failure. All right, so these are some ways that you could start meditation today. So usually when people haven't had experience with meditation before, it's really hard to jump into a strict routine of it. So we usually say, eyes closed rest for 10 minutes, even 5 minutes every morning or night. Try to incorporate that into your routine. It's sort of a gradual way to start meditating. And these are some great apps that you can download to sort of guide you through that. And if you practice, it can get easier to stay focused, meditate with more of a routine, and build a habit out of that. And so now I think, we have some discussion questions, so you can answer in the chat. So the first one is, can exercise or anything else you find relaxing? Like some people say that going for a walk relaxes them or reduces stress. Can those things substitute for meditation? And then the second one is, why do you think people are more reluctant to add meditation than change other parts of their lifestyle?
Do you students meditate? How can we inspire teens to do this?
Yeah, so actually, when I first learned about, the importance of meditation for heart health, it was when I first started volunteering with the South Asian Heart Center. And before everyone was saying meditation is important, I never really took it seriously, and it was still definitely hard for me to start meditating. So I think as a student, the best way that I found to start is just using one of the apps. So like Headspace is a really good app, has guided meditation. It sort of reminds you to meditate. So you don't have to worry about building that into your schedule. It's really simple. So I think as a student with limited time, these apps are really helpful. Yeah, so I have an answer in the chat. So um, someone said yes, that you can substitute other things that are relaxing for meditation. So that's definitely true. If as long as you're doing something that reduces your stress levels, that is an effective way to reduce cortisol, as well as or decrease your risk of heart disease. But a lot of studies have shown that meditation does a lot of things that other activities don't. So meditation is specifically being restful while awake. So there's a lot of unique benefits from meditating specifically that other activities don't necessarily bring. And the second response was that it is easier to take 20 minutes out of your day instead of changing their daily diet. That's definitely true. Large changes that to a large part of your lifestyle are definitely more difficult. Meditation is not taken as seriously as well by a lot of people. So I think the best way is to start small. There's a lot of great suggestions in the chat. Going out for a walk when you feel stressed, meditating right before sleep is a good option. All right, so we can move on to the second portion of the Meds platform, which is exercise. And so the recommendation or goal for exercise here is specifically with cardio, 150 minutes per week. So that adds up to about 30 minutes 5 times a week, or less if you do it every day. And along with the cardio exercise, we want some sort of strength training or like weight training twice a week, at least for 15 to 20 minutes each time. And on top of that, we want our exercise to be regular, varied, and vigorous. So what that means is a lot of people will, go out on long weekend hikes and say that satisfies their exercise quota for the whole week. But if you want to see the full benefits of exercise, you want to have a regular routine where you exercise every day or every other day. You also want it to be vigorous. So, it's always good to start off slow if you'd like. But we want, for example, in cardio, we want a brisk paced walk or a jog or a run, anything that increases your heart rate, increases your breathing rate. And for strength training, we definitely want it to be varied. So we want to exercise different muscle groups to, reduce the risk of injury, but also make sure you're building up your strength, in all parts. So these are sort of the four main things we look for in exercise. But aerobic exercise and strength training is definitely really important and what we want to prioritize. A lot of people say that they do yoga routines and say that counts as exercise. If there's any strength training involved, there's a lot of core exercises in yoga. That's definitely good, but we want to make sure that we're doing something that increases your heart rate as well as falls under resistance training. So there's been a lot of research done on the importance of exercise for heart health. So studies have shown that people who drive to work or commute to work rather than bike or walk have a higher risk of coronary occlusion, so higher risk of heart attack in the long term. So 3 to 8 hours of walking per week reduce the mortality by 15%, and vigorous exercise, even 1 to 2 hours, reduces the mortality by 35%. So when you have exercise, what that does is not only does it lower your blood sugar, it's called natural insulin, but it also lowers cholesterol as well as triglycerides, which is the free-flowing lipids and fats in your bloodstream. So right after you've had a meal, if you go on a walk, that helps control the spike in sugar levels. that you usually get right after eating, which is definitely helpful. And overall, it decreases the risk of cholesterol and hyperlipidemia. And so research has been done on the fitness level. So metabolic fitness is an important term. Basically, when you look at things like LDL, HDL, triglycerides, and blood sugar, metabolic fitness is having a good value for at least 3 of those 4 things. And exercise helps with all of them. So here are some tips and ways that you can add exercise to your own schedule. Obviously, this is a lot different right now because of COVID. Gyms are closed, it's harder for people to get out. So some tips to exercise at home, for example, if you're doing something stationary, standing up, reducing your sedentary time, getting up every 30 minutes to either get a drink of water, go to the restroom. Those are all very helpful. Exercising outdoors with friends or family while social distancing, and adding it to your calendar, setting reminders, anything you can do that motivates you and reminds you to get up and exercise. And so here are some good times that you can do that as well. Yeah, and here's your discussion question for this section. How do you motivate yourself to stay active during quarantine, and what are some exercises you can do at home? Definitely dancing, downloading a pedometer app to make sure you get in 10,000 steps each day. That's definitely good. One thing we look for when we're walking, when people go on walks, is we want the walk to be at a brisk pace to actually count for cardio exercise. So you want to be breathing heavily. If you're walking with someone, it should be difficult for you to maintain a conversation with them. And one way to up your speed and walking is to monitor your step count. So that's really important.
So the next section of the acronym MEDS is diet. If you're a student like the 3 of us are, you might be familiar with the difficulties of making healthy dietary choices living on a college campus. It can be really hard having access to nutritious, balanced meals, or even just a kitchen where you can prepare meals. But there are a couple of goals that the South Asian Heart Center really likes to help people set in terms of how people should plan their meals and think about their nutrition. So the first goal from the South Asian Heart Center is the 0, 1, 2, 12 rule. And it basically stands for 0 sugary drinks, 1 fist of fruit, 2 fists of vegetables, and 12 nuts per day. So for 0 sugary drinks, we'll talk more about sugary drinks in general later on, but for the fruit, it should be varied fruit, so different types of fruit. 2 fists vegetables, and these are more of like your green leafy vegetables, your non-starchy vegetables. So starchy vegetables would be like potatoes, peas, corn. So this is more talking about your green leafy vegetables. And then also 12 nuts, which is about like a handful. It'll give you the perfect amount of vitamins and nutrients without too much of the fat. So this is the 0, 1, 2, 12 rule. The next goal is the plate method, and you might have heard of the plate method before. It's a guideline set by the USDA, and it's a traditional, like a 9-inch plate. So if you're looking at a plate, the guideline is that 1/2 of the plate should be non-starchy vegetables, 1/4 should be your grains, and they should be whole grains, and then 1/4 should be protein. So the diagram kind of shows how the plate method would look like on your traditional 9-inch plate. For vegetarians, that protein section might look a little different. So instead of meats, other things that would count for proteins are like lentils, beans, dal, as well, tofu. So all of that would count under your protein. And then whole grains would be like having whole wheat toast instead of white bread, as well as brown rice instead of white rice, and different options to substitute more whole grains. Okay, so the plate method on the previous slide is kind of difficult to visualize for every single meal because usually meals are pretty much mixed with a bunch of different food groups all mixed on one plate. So these are just some pictures of how your plate method might look like for like different meals. And a lot of these meal options are great for vegans, vegetarians, whatever dietary restrictions you might have. But the whole goal is to sort of have double your vegetables than either your grains or your proteins. If your grain intake, for example, is more like 1-to-1 with your vegetables, the whole goal is that by increasing vegetables, over time your grains will start decreasing. as you get full more easily with those vegetables. So that's kind of a great way to start incorporating the plate method. Maybe add one more serving of vegetables to either your lunch or dinner. So yeah, these are just some ideas for meals. Okay, so there are a couple of different things that the South Asian Heart Center says to avoid eating because they do make your blood cholesterol rise and contribute to the risk for heart disease and diabetes. So it's good to avoid eating a lot of red meat, palm and coconut oils, sugary food, which we'll talk about, as well as high sodium foods. And there are two nutrients that make your blood cholesterol rise. So this would be your saturated fats, which are mostly found in foods that come from animals, as well as trans fats, which are found in foods made with like hydrogenated oils and fats. But it's also important to note that not all fats are bad. So on the next slide, you'll see that there's actually a lot of fats, so monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, that actually help lower your blood cholesterol levels. So a lot of these fats are recommended to people who are diabetic or have type 2 diabetes. And examples of these fats are avocados, corn, sunflower, soybean, olive oil, nuts and seeds, peanut butter, salmon and trout if you aren't vegetarian, and tofu. Peanut butter, it's a great snack to have with like a fruit. So like 2 tablespoons of peanut butter with like a fruit would be a great snack to add, and incorporating like avocados in any of your meals or in a snack. So yeah, it's good to focus. So avoid saturated and trans fats and focus more on monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats to help lower your blood cholesterol. Okay. So we've decided to talk a little bit about sugars and drinks because avoiding sugars and drinks is really important to help decrease the spikes in your blood sugar. So when sugars are dissolved in liquids, for example, like juices or even your tea or coffee with sugar or sweeteners, they cause your blood sugar to spike rapidly. Blood sugar spikes happen when your glucose basically builds up in your bloodstream. And if insulin is insufficient enough to control the glucose spikes, it could lead to a lot of long-term damage to your organs, your nerves, and your blood vessels. So artificial sweeteners is a controversial and highly debated upon topic because even though they're often advertised as healthy sounding, like for example, there's the sweetener called agave nectar. And it's very like branded and marketed as a healthy alternative to sugar. But it's also important to note that there are cons to artificial sweeteners. So long-term usage has been shown to be linked with diabetes and obesity, as well as when you have sweeteners in drinks, your brain still continues to perceive it as sweet, which leads to long-term harm. They also have been shown to harm the growth of your good bacteria in your gut microbiome, and they'll also affect your overall sugar tolerance. So currently there isn't enough research to give a definitive answer whether or not sweeteners will raise your blood sugar levels long term. But since it has been shown to have a link to like heart disease, diabetes, and negatively impacting your gut microbiome, it is important to be cautious about consuming artificial sweeteners as well. So another recommendation that the South Asian Heart Center has is to try adding sweeter spices instead to, for example, like your tea or coffee. So cinnamon, nutmeg, cardamom, those are some examples of sweeter spices you could try adding instead of sugar. So these are some discussion questions for the diet section. So the first one is, has it been easier or harder to follow a healthy meal plan during quarantine, and why? And then if you are a student, so for anyone who has moved back home from living on campus or has moved back to campus recently, what changes have you noticed in your diet? So basically, how has this period of quarantine affected your diet and your meal plan? So again, you can answer this in chat, and we'll give a few minutes for people to answer if you'd like. Yeah, I see in the chat, so buying fresh fruits and vegetables from the store and eating mindfully is definitely a great way. Also, like incorporating the plate method, even meal prepping in the beginning of the week. And that would also definitely help like incorporate healthy lifestyle choices. Yeah, and I'm seeing it's harder for some people and easier for others. Definitely during this time, it can be hard to follow a meal plan that's consistent throughout the week. Okay, and then just really quickly, so I see a question about coconut oil. So coconut oil has, it is actually linked to heart disease. I think it's about like 80% saturated fats. The most recommended type of oil for like medium cooking is olive oil, which is also like drizzled like on top of salads and different things. So we do recommend olive oil for general use. And yeah, saturated coconut oil, it's, I think in India, sometimes you can find it as a liquid form. Over here, it's more in the solid form, but it does have high saturated fats. So there is some controversy about coconut oil consumption, but it is important to know that it's high in saturated fats. And then there's a lot of different apps I'm seeing in the chat, which is great. Yeah. Avocado oil is great for really like high heat cooking. So it's best for like if you're frying occasionally or high heat cooking, but olive oil is definitely the best choice for general use. Okay.
All right, finally, and the last section we're going to be going over is sleep, which I feel like a lot of people tend to ignore just because we're like students and young adults. It's like really hard to maintain a good sleep schedule. So if you look on the next slide, you can also see the relationship between sleep duration and obesity. Like the sleep average throughout the years has been getting decreased, and like you can see the effect on BMI has been increasing because of that. It's really important to get like a good 8 hours of sleep. You can see on the chart on the right, in blue, that's like the optimal amount because that has the lowest risk factor at like, I think it's 1, it's kind of tiny, but too much sleep or too less sleep is detrimental. And like, it's like, I know it's easier said than done, but like napping is also not like a good substitute. Like if you get a good 8 hours of sleep, just because there have been studies that have shown that anything more than a 60-minute nap increases risk of death. And less than 15, I think it was like less than 15 minutes is like 19% more of a risk factor. And then anything over an hour is 34% higher. So like if you're not getting enough sleep, napping is not the substitute. It really is to like create a good schedule, work out your day and plan ahead so you can get a good 8 hours of sleep every night. And in the next slide, you can see ways we can develop these better sleeping habits. So it's recommended 7 to 8 hours, as that's where it's like decreasing the risk factor, as we saw in the previous slide. It's really important to avoid, blue light. A lot of people now have been getting like blue light glasses because especially like over quarantine and online classes, we're seeing a screen all the time. So it's really important to like try to avoid as much screen time at night as possible because it does affect with the brain activity and affects melatonin as well. And developing a sleep routine, avoiding caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant, so it's going to increase, Shreyas talked about cortisol earlier. Caffeine also increases brain activity, the nervous system, adrenaline, cortisol, and that's all like you want to be calm at night. That's why, like, as we talked about in the meditation section, it's really important to like not use your phone like a good 30 minutes to an hour before sleeping, just calming your body, nothing to increase body activity. And developing a sleep hygiene. So there's like 7 steps here. You can stick to a sleep schedule, pay attention to what you're eating and drinking. There's many apps now that you can download and keep track of everything. Creating a bedtime ritual, making sure you're in a comfortable environment, like make sure like your mattress can really impact this as well. Limiting daytime naps, as I talked about. Include physical activity, as we talked about, like going on walks or runs, some type of activity to increase your heart rate, and just managing stress as much as possible. And then finally, you can do this by creating a SMART goal. So SMART is an abbreviation for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So for specific, you can see like, what are you going to accomplish? Like, what actions are you going to take? So are you going to like work out like 30 minutes every day, 1 hour? You can start small and slowly increase as you build up stamina. Next, like measurable, what data will measure the goal? So are you going to work on like your BMI, your weight, like what in specific do you want to work on? Achievable, is the goal doable? Do you have the necessary skills and resources? If you set like too high of a goal right away, that can really be discouraging. It's better to do smaller goals and make like change them over time than having like a really hard goal to start with. And then relevant, like how does the goal align with broader goals? Why is the result important? And then finally, time bound. What is the time frame for accomplishing your goal? So if we like on the next slide, we can come up with a SMART goal for yourself. So if you guys want to brainstorm for yourselves, maybe on notes, what your goal is and come up with something for each of these questions and maybe share one of them in the section, in the chat.
There's a question in the chat about students managing sleep schedules. So it's definitely very difficult in high school and in college, especially if you're taking a heavier course load to get enough sleep. So a lot of people will be staying awake until 1, 2, or even 3 a.m. So I think personally, if I end up staying awake until 2 a.m., I try to sleep in the next day to make sure I get at least 8 hours, so waking up at 10. The time you go to bed and the time you wake up isn't as important as the duration. And as long as you try to wake up naturally and you're not on screens too late at night, then that's pretty good. Yeah, this was also the end of the presentation. So if anyone else has any questions, we'd love to answer them.
Thank you all so much for such a thorough presentation. That was fantastic. So we're just going to use this like the last 10-ish minutes to wrap up our program. So, we talked about a lot of different things that you can do to maintain your heart health. What do you think is the biggest one out of meditation, sleep, diet, and exercise? Which component do you think is the largest component that, like, especially you've seen in your own personal interactions with people who you're helping out?
I think for everyone, it's different depending on your lifestyle and what you are currently doing as part of your lifestyle routine. But I will say that each part is equally as important. So people often forget like meditation and sleep, they're the bookends of meds, but they're equally as important as your diet and your exercise. So it really depends on what current lifestyle schedule person has. But yeah, everything is equally as important. Following the plate method, having nutritious meals, getting 8 hours of sleep, doing aerobic as well as strength training, and reducing your stress by meditating.
So Manisha says, do you think it's hard to motivate students to engage in these types of components?
I think when you're, especially over quarantine, it can be harder just because you're not surrounded by other people, but it also can be like self-motivating for yourself because you do have more time to work on yourself. So it is hard, but I don't know, like setting goals, like following the SMART schedule, like can really help in the long run as well.
And kind of tying into that, so you're all like young adults age, like, so what are some preventative things that you can do at a younger age to prevent these kinds of risks later in life? What would your message be to like younger people? Because like that's kind of the point of this. Like, what would your takeaway be for like these are the things you can do now to prevent it later on?
Yeah, so I think following the lifestyle platform of like meditating, exercising, dieting, and getting a good night's sleep is really important for long-term health. But in terms of preventative measures, I think just building the habits for those, even if you're not able to do it as consistently with the lack of time as students, getting that into your routine at least a little bit so that you're used to doing those things in your daily routine is definitely helpful in the long term because it's not as hard to build up these good habits from scratch later on.
And then we have another question that's more medically related. So someone was asking, what extra blood work can they order during their annual physical exams to catch those components below the iceberg?
Yeah, so your normal blood test that you usually order is like your lipid profile. So the way that the South Asian Heart Center does it is through Quest Diagnostics. And usually, even when you get a referral from your own physician, not just the South Asian Heart Center, you can ask them specifically, can I get tested for these things? And they'll mark it on you in your referral form. And if you go to the South Asian Heart Center's website, a lot of this information is on there. So like the iceberg chart, the comprehensive screening, so you can take a look at those.
I think we can just wrap it up with our last question. So if we could just go around with all of the three panelists, what would be your take-home message from this presentation, or a couple key things that people can do in their action plan following the session?
I think my biggest takeaway would, for everyone who's listening, would be to make small, reasonable lifestyle goals. So like Shreya introduced the acronym SMART. So that's a great way to start setting some goals. If you don't currently meditate, it would probably really hard to start meditating 20 minutes twice a day. Or if you don't currently do exercise, it would be really hard to start exercising every day. And that sort of goal would be easy to give up in a short while. So the best way is to start small. Exercise maybe once or twice a week on a specific day and a specific time, and add it into your schedule. So make it part of your routine, set reminders for yourself. And all of that would just be a really great way to start making these lifestyle goals.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Starting small with SMART goals. I also think doing your research. I didn't personally take meditation and sleep that seriously until I started learning about how it actually affects your biological systems. All the research on like hormone levels and mortality rates. It definitely, I guess, gets you to take it more seriously. So doing your research helps.
Yeah, I think Namrata and Shreyas covered it. I also have been working on sleep a lot. Like I've never pulled an all-nighter for anything. Like I always make sure to get a good like sleep schedule because it does help. Another takeaway that I wanted to add was like start sooner than later. Like you don't want to like wait, like think you're not like high risk now, like even though it is going to affect you later in life, like it's easier to start now maintaining a healthy diet, exercising, so then in the long run you're reducing your risk factors as much as possible. So
We just like to thank our panelists once again for joining us.